I've made hundreds of dioramas over the years, many of which were either sold to other collectors or commissioned by them. And one of the most popular commission requests I have received is for the Resident Evil RPD station. In fact, I've made 3 of them over the years. Most recently in 2023, when I shipped this piece off to a customer in Hong Kong. This is the story of how I made it. I modeled the diorama and all the pieces I would need in Tinkercad. I planned the diorama to be 20 inches wide, 16 inches tall, and 7 inches deep, which is exactly what you see here in Tinkercad sized out. Before I even put blade to foam, I decided to go ahead and print as many of these 3D printed parts as I could, so I would make sure that they all fit properly and I got all my test prints out and that I didn't have any issues. Luckily for me, I have 2 printers, and so I used my Kingroon KP3 to print some of the smaller pieces like the RPD signage. Now this print's far from perfect, but we're gonna process it and make it look great. While that was on the Kingroon, I was using my Ender 3 V2 to print my column pieces. Now there were 4 of these and they each took well over 4 hours to print. So I had to plan my time accordingly. One of the great things about using 3D printers is you can really be efficient with your time. So while things are printing, you can be doing things like this, carving out the different pieces of the diorama structure. Some of my carving's done with blades and some of it's done with my Proxxon. And when I use my Proxxon, I'm a huge advocate of using a 3M fume mask to keep myself safe. I also turn on a fan to get some proper ventilation in my space. Next, I line up my cut and away I go. Here I'm cutting each edge to make sure that they all have a 90-degree angle. I want to make sure this looks as professional and clean as possible. Now that the base is cut, I want to go ahead and get my wall piece cut. I want this to have some depth to it because it's going to house the gate. So I'm using 2-inch foam for the wall piece, and what I'm doing is just sizing it up against the base that I just cut. Next, I use the base as a template and I mark my spots for where I want to cut this with my Proxxon. To make this project easier, I'm going to be using my Proxxon foot pedal, which gives me a lot more control. When the switch is turned on and you press the pedal, it lights up and we've got heat going to the wire so we can use it to cut our foam. I'm going to be using this to cut 2-inch foam, so I need to turn the dial up higher than what it normally would be. I normally cut it like a 3, so I'm going to go at about a 5 for this. This is a pretty big piece of foam to manage on the Proxxon, so I'm using the foot pedal to allow myself to stop at certain points without causing extra bleed in how big the cuts are on the foam cutter. The next thing I do is mark the bottom of the piece with a B because that is going to be magnetized to the base. I want this piece to be 16 inches tall, so I'm using the drywall T-square to mark those spaces. And then it's back to the Proxxon to cut off that excess that we marked. I'm using some copper tubing that are the same size as the ceramic magnets that I'm going to use to magnetize the diorama. And what I'm doing is just carving a circle into each spot that I want a magnet to exist in. I accomplish that by doing a twisting motion down into the foam. Then I take my X-Acto knife and I cut my line the width of what the magnet is going to be so that it will fit right down in there. I always like to check my work before I glue them, so I just pop the magnets in and make sure they fit. Everything checks out, so time to use some low temperature hot glue to get these in place. By the way, I absolutely love this battery powered hot glue gun by Ryobi, which runs on their OnePlus system. The next thing I do is put some magnets on top of the ones I just installed so that I can make an impression in the wall, so I'll know exactly where to cut my lines, and so those magnets will fit into the wall and line up perfectly with the polarity of the base magnets. I use the same process here with the copper tubing and the twisting motion to cut out these magnet spots. Then I also carve a line the width of the magnet to remove the foam, and so I can insert those magnets into the spot and get this magnetized. The magnets that I have very clearly mark polarity, so I just make sure that I'm not putting 2 negatives together or 2 positives together. Everything looks like it's checking out. Now that the structure of the dial is in place, we're going to use this clear Gorilla Glue to glue our 3D printed parts together. Here I am putting together the different parts of the gate piece, which I need to assemble and have dry so that I can cut out where that gate is going to be in the foam and start to install it. Using a scrap piece of foam to apply this Gorilla Glue evenly to the plastic is a pretty good little hack that I learned from my friend High School Creations. This glue needs to cure for 12 hours, so we'll set it aside. Next, I wanted to find the little foam platforms that these columns are going to sit on. I'm going to make 2 of these. You could cut these by hand, but I'm going to go ahead and do them on the Proxxon just so I keep with that 90-degree angle on the edges of this for gluing purposes. Here's a look at these as a dry fit underneath the pillars that are going to be on each side. And these are 3D printed parts that I'll be gluing. And then I'm going to put the gate that we're letting dry right here. The next step is to cut these specialized pieces on the facade of the diorama. I mark these with a permanent marker to make sure they're the same width as those pieces we just cut that go under the pillars. From here, I just make a straightforward cut using this 90-degree angle before adjusting the wire to an angled cut that I'll use to create the triangular pieces that will finish this facade piece. And now I can glue them together with some low temperature hot glue. I position the gate where I want it to be, and then I use an X-Acto knife just to loosely mark where the outskirts of the gate are going to be. That's not a full trace. I'm just making little puncture marks that I can use later in a more stable flat surface to trace where the gate is going to end up being. This is going to be a guideline that I'm going to use to actually cut this door out with the Proxxon just to make it as precise as possible. And really the first thing I'm going to do is just cut these 2 vertical lines, cutting, turning off the heat, and then backing it out on one, and then repeating the process on the other side. To trace the arch portion of this, I'm using a compass with the pencil on the end of it. And now I'm going to do something I don't recommend for beginners. I'm going to go freehand on cutting the arch out with the Proxxon. I do have a shifting land circle cutting jig that you could probably use for this part of the project. But because I wasn't carving a perfect circle, just an archway, I wanted to try to attempt it this way. This also would be almost impossible to do without the foot pedal because I would have to be reaching under to power the machine on and off. The foot pedal allows me to make that control as I'm cutting it and making sure that I stop when I need to. And after we're done cutting, I can just pop this out and see what my results are. There are a few little imperfections, but I can fix those with some processing. I don't want to bore you, so I'm going to go ahead and just show you little snippets of each piece where I was just using the tinfoil to get coverage on the entire piece, making sure that I use some little impressions here and there to get that concrete look that we ultimately want. In the Resident Evil video games, there's cobblestone in some versions of the RPD station on the base. So what I'm doing here is just carving like a regular sidewalk line and then adding in those cobblestone carvings. Here's a super sped up look at what I'm doing here. I'm not doing anything in terms of planning, just trying to make these all different shapes and sizes the way cobblestones are and the way it looks in some of the video games. After the lines are carved with the X-Acto knife, I use my trusty clay sculpting tool to define them because I am going to add mortar to this later, and this is going to allow the mortar someplace to go. And then of course, for consistency, here's a super sped up version of me texturing the cobblestones with tinfoil and an actual rock. There are some spots on the diorama that have scoring lines and other defects that I want to fix, so I'm going to use some lightweight wall spackle to fill those in and fix those up. Whenever I do this, I just apply a generous amount and wipe it away with a gift card, allowing it to be somewhat flat on the surface, and so you don't really notice it at the end of the diorama project when you've painted everything. So I have my 2 gate pieces that are glued together now, but I also have these hinges that they're going to operate on. So I want you guys to see these are 2 different pieces. So there's the piece that is going to serve as the holder for the hinge, and then the hinge itself, and these are going to rotate. So I have these as mirror images, so 2 on this side, 2 on that side, and now I need to glue them together, which I'm going to continue to do with the Gorilla Glue like we did to glue these together. To sort of balance things out, I'm going to put these hinges, which are meant for this gate, on this side and not glue these in place, and I'm going to glue the 2 in place here. Now what we're going to do is install these gates. So the gate pieces have solidified from the glue, and they're going to sit here. So I have the spots pre-marked, And once they're glued in place, this is how the gate is going to function. It's going to open out this way, not inside. So you can see that that's what we're going for. And these should fit perfectly in that space once they're both glued in. So now what I've done is I've just marked where the top of each one of these little hinge pieces should be. So you've got this one's going to be here, this one's going to be here, and then these two as well. And now, as a little trick, just to make sure, I need these to be lined up properly. If I glue them separately without having the gate attached, the possibility that they won't be perfectly aligned and the gate won't hinge right. So I've turned the gate around, and I'm gonna glue these in place with the gate turned around, knowing that I can take it out after it's done and put it the right way. Gonna use this Hot Wire Foam Factory styro glue that I use all the time. Love how this stuff bonds to XPS. And so we're just gonna go ahead and take some of it and place it right on these hinge pieces. To maximize my time while that's drying, I go ahead and start sanding down the pillar pieces and the other 3D printed pieces using my Ryobi rotary tool. This is another safety first moment. I'm using a dust mask and goggles to protect my eyes because there are little particles of PLA plastic flying everywhere as I sand this down. The rotary head that I was using was pretty coarse on purpose, so now I'm going in with a finer grit sandpaper. I think this is a 120, just to smooth out some of what I was just doing on the pillar pieces. And since we're on the topic of sanding, I also use a nail file sometimes to sand some things down, especially with things like this that have multiple angles on them. After sanding each of the 3D printed parts, I'm going to use this primer to finish off the parts before painting. This is going to help us eliminate those layer lines along with the sanding that we did earlier. Some lightweight wall spackle is also going to help that on this RPD station sign where we had some gapping that the primer did not fill in. After that wall spackle dries, I go ahead and hit it with the same nail file that I used earlier on it to sand everything down. I am just hot gluing these foam pieces in place and then using some Hot Wire Foam Factory styro glue to glue the PLA parts in the bottom of the pillar. I continue with the Hot Wire Foam Factory styro glue to bond the PLA plastic to the foam, and I just take my time and install all of the different column pieces and all of the different column piece caps on this diorama. For the cap portion, I opted to put this right side up and let gravity help me as I was gluing these into place. Once those were in, it was time to install these 2 foam facade pieces that we created earlier. While everything sets in place, I'm going to go ahead and attach the gate pieces again just to test them out and make sure that they open and close the way I want. I didn't like the piece I originally had to work between these 2 foam pieces that we created for the facade. So what I'm going to do is place this upside down on a thicker piece of foam, and I'm going to actually trace some permanent marker for lines that we can cut on an angle to have a better fitting piece here. I want this part to be sturdy because we're going to sit the sign on top of it, so it needs to be really secure. So I used 2 different glues on this, Hot Wire Foam Factory styro glue for a long-term set and also some hot glue for a short-term set. I hot glue them in place. For this one, I really want to make sure that it goes straight across. There's no bending because we need this to look like a solid concrete pillar. I want to continue this look across the piece, and I want it to have that angle that you see heading up to the triangular portion of this. So I'm just cutting those out now. And once they're ready, I just hot glue each one of them in place, give a little pressure, and we're good to go. There's a little gap above those facade pieces that I want to fill in, and this project foam from Dollar Tree works perfectly for that. All I do is place it upside down and then trace the outline, and use my utility knife to cut them out. Hot glue these with the low temperature hot glue gun in place, flipping this upside down and filling in all the gaps from the trim we just created so it looks like this is one huge concrete slab. I chose Granite Gray by Apple Barrel to base coat this diorama base in. My goal in this first step is just to get full coverage of the piece. I want this gray in every nook and cranny, crack and crevice that I've carved into the base. Once the base is done, it's time to move on to the feature piece of the diorama, our wall. And for this, I opted to use some black by Anita's. There's a lot to this piece, and I want to make sure I get full coverage. So whenever I can, I manipulate the dio so that I can most easily paint in all of those hard to reach areas, like underneath this concrete portion. The base and the wall are drying, so I'm going to go ahead and spray paint the 2 gates that we have. I'm just using a regular Rust-Oleum metallic silver on these. This is the color I'm going to be airbrushing the diorama with. I've included a link to this in the description. I consider myself an airbrush rookie. At the time of recording this video, this is either the 5th or 6th project that I'd used an airbrush on ever. Now that I've said that, let me just say, I love using this thing now that I've figured out how to properly clean it, maintain it, and avoid some issues that are commonly associated with airbrushing. For the first coat that we're airbrushing, I want this to be good coverage, but not complete coverage. I want some of the black that we put down on the base coat to still come through in the shadows of the piece. For my second coat, I'm going to mix this black with the gray and spray that on. It might be kind of hard to see what I'm doing here, but I'm just basically adding in a darker gray shadow to some areas of the diorama. Whenever I dry brush or weather a piece, I always try to think about where dirt would accumulate naturally on a piece of construction like this. And in my mind, that's almost always going to be in these little crevice areas, along the areas where the columns are meeting the walls, and naturally dirt can get kicked up from the ground, so I feel like the areas that are touching the ground are definitely spots that you want to dry brush that dirt onto. Something that my diorama mentor Al Figures always taught me is that you want to paint the areas of the diorama that are least likely to be seen as well, like the underside of this concrete area that I'm painting right now. In case you're wondering, my washes are almost always very, very thin. The recipe to this wash is super simple, literally just water and brown paint. I'm really a fan of paint subtlety, and I feel like the way I approach my washes allow me to do that. I also really like hitting the areas that I dry brush to get that grime with a wash to add more dirt. And I'm not done with this wash yet. I'm also going to use this on the base. The difference here is that I want to get full coverage of the wash on this piece, and I feel like using the wash kind of stains the piece from that lighter gray that we had earlier to something a little bit darker, a little bit more dirty, and a little bit more gross. If any of you subscribe to my friend Drip Mode's YouTube channel, you'll often see him going back and forth between washes and dry brushing just to get the highlights of the piece right. It's time to revisit the base with paint washes again, but this time I am going to paint selective cobblestone pieces with the wash only. I'm going to use a much smaller brush head on this just so I can get a little bit more control, a little bit more detail. But really, I'm just trying to darken some of the cobblestones, not all of them. And I'm going to use the brown wash first, and then I'm going to switch over to this yellow wash, using it to do the same exact thing, picking select bricks, coloring them in, so to speak, and making sure that I'm not getting too much of a harsh color on those, and if I do, I just wipe it away with a paper towel. To make sure this is fully dry before I do my third coat of paint washes, I just run a paper towel over top of it. I want to lighten this piece up a bit, but I also want it to seem dirty, so I'm going to use that yellow wash again over top of the entire piece, which will hopefully help me blend together all the different cobblestone color pieces that we had done in the previous step. While that's drying, I paint the RPD station sign white. As I'm airbrushing this, my goal is to kind of have it be dirtiest on the bottom and work its way up, fading into the metallic color towards the top. And I actually decide that I'm going to go back to the base and I'm going to airbrush some of that as well. For this dry brushing coat, I ended up just doing a little bit along the concrete crack lines and some of the edging of the diorama just to add in a darker tone of that earth brown that we had used earlier in the project. Then I took that same earth brown and I used it on the gate, trying to get that fade technique that I was talking about earlier, adding some detailing towards the bottom of the gate and trying to fade it up to the metallic portion of the top part of the gate. And here's a quick look at how it's looking so far after we did those paint techniques. So off camera, I sprayed this with Miniwax polyurethane and I let it dry for several hours. And now what I'm going to do is add in some mortar between the cobblestones. And I'm going to do that with this paint and patch lightweight wall spackle, which I use all the time on this channel. And it's a really simple process that I'm going to show you guys. I use an old gift card for this process, but you can use any sort of straight edge to spread the wall spackle all over the entire piece. I don't want any of the cracks of the cobblestones to go uncovered, and so I'm spreading them all the way across both sides of this, starting with one side, and then I'll move on to the next side. After you're satisfied, grab yourself a cloth and some water, and then just simply wipe this stuff away. Now, if you've used the Miniwax polyurethane or another sealing method, this should protect the piece from wiping away your actual paint. The next thing that I wanted to do was paint the Raccoon police sign that goes under the RPD sign. And I tried a couple of different methods with this. I tried a regular paintbrush first. I wasn't feeling it. Then I tried these graffiti markers, which I still wasn't feeling. And then I went back to the paintbrush with a smaller tip. And I just really was very, very careful with what I was doing. And I feel like that was the ticket. Once that was out of the way, it was time to get this RPD station sign looking dirty and grimy and like it had been there for years. There were definitely a couple things with this sign that caused me to kind of go to my backup plan, but I'm really glad that I did because I think you'll see in the end that it worked out really well. So I preset the Hotwire Foam Factory styro glue onto the sign, the back of the sign. But one of the things that I do sometimes, if I know I want something to stick immediately, but then I also want a stronger hold over time, I'm also going to put some hot glue so that the hot glue will kind of immediately dry, while then, you know, the stronger glue will hold over time. So the hot glue just kind of like is that placeholder that keeps it in place until it's actually strong enough from the other glue to be permanently there. Here's a closer look at the fixture holder. So this is a 3D print design that I had made myself that mimics what you see in the video game. This slot is where the wire is going to get fed up into from outside, from the back. These are going to sit right in here. I'm going to glue them in place. There'll be a hole in the back here, and that's what is going to feed the LED right into the light. Because these are spheres, I'm spraying them lightly, but to stop them from moving, I have them placed in some 3D print failures. Then I'm just lightly going over them so I get full coverage, but I don't get too much coverage. So here's what the light fixture is going to look like now that the paint is dried. So what I'm going to do is just use this Dremel to drill a hole in the back side of it. If you don't have a Dremel and you're looking for a good one, I highly recommend the Ryobi 1+1 that I use. It made drilling these holes extremely easy and just took a matter of seconds. Once that's done, all I have to do is thread the LED wired lighting through the hole that I created with the Dremel so that I'll be able to push it through the wall area and then ultimately wire the lighting. But before I do that, I need to mount these to the wall. So first I'm mounting the fixtures using hot glue, being very careful not to cover the area that I need the wire to travel through on the 3D print. Then I turn back to one of my favorites, Hotwire Foam Factory styro glue, to glue the orbs into place on top of the fixtures. For this project, I'm going to need a power source, some AA batteries, micro LEDs, 3 to be exact, some heat shrink, and some Velcro. I purchased 3 micro LEDs, a red one and 2 cool white ones that are their largest size, which is their mega size. And then I also purchased 1 power supply from them, which is a 3-volt power supply. So 1.5 AA battery, 1.5 AA battery, 3 volts total. The only problem is I only ordered 1 power supply. And if I was mounting this, if this gate wasn't here and I was mounting this in the middle, I would be able to power most likely this light, and the one above it if I got creative with how I did some of the wiring. But that's not going to be the case this time. I need to put this light, the red light needs to be right up here. And then I have the 2 on the side. So what I had to do is go on Amazon for the sake of time and buy these other power supplies. And these actually have a release on the back, and these pop off. So what I'm gonna have to do is Velcro these because the power switch is actually on this side, and it's not gonna be super easy to get this off. So I'm gonna have to Velcro these on to 3 different spots and have 3 different power supplies for these lights, which I plan to do with these Velcro strips that I got at my local Hobby Lobby. I had a hunch that the thin white Velcro strips might be my best option because of the size of this battery pack. So after I took them out of the packaging, I sized them up to make sure that they would actually work on the battery pack. And from there, I just took a Sharpie and marked the edge of where the battery pack ended to guide where I'm going to cut these. And with the use of my trusty scissors, I'll be able to cut through these. Now, these do have adhesive on the back, so you have to be a little bit careful because it kind of gives you a little friction when you're trying to cut. And I just pop these right into place, make sure I've got a good solid hold. And then the last thing I have to do for this part of it is just mount this up against the other side of the Velcro and cut that through. I'm just going to use this single set of AA batteries as sort of my test set after I pop them out of the other supply source, and I'm going to test them in these Amazon supply sources. If you've never done this before, the LEDs have color-coded wires, so you just match up the colors from the LED with the colors on the power supply wires. In order to fully wire these up, you have to twist them around each other and then put heat shrink on them, which is what we're going to do later. But for this step, I just need to make them touch with the on switch turned on and make sure that the light actually turns on when they're touching. We're all Velcroed and tested, now it's time to mount these. You may be wondering why I'm choosing to use Velcro here. Why don't I just glue the power sources into place? Good question. It's because of the design of these power supplies. If I slide off the backing, you'll see what I mean. In order to mount these with glue, the battery would need to be here, not here. Shout out to my friend Terrafoamer that helped me think through this problem and come up with the Velcro solution. And now you know why I'm doing what I'm doing. Here's a time lapse of me mounting these to the piece. As I mentioned before, you want to line up the colors on the power supply with the colors on the LED wiring. And basically what you're going to do is twist that metal wire from the LED on top of the power supply coil. And make sure that the metal pieces are touching and wrapped around tightly. And then you want to place your heat shrink on each wire, letting it slide down. We're going to want to place that over the top of the tied together wired lights. The wiring can be finicky, so you want to make sure that you test that it works before you solidify the wiring with that heat shrink. Grab yourself a heat source and slide the heat shrink over top of the connected wire. Light your heat source and shrink the tube. You want to place it close to the wire, but you don't want to burn the wire. Time to use the same process to get the third light functional, which is our overhead red light. I'm not exactly sure what these are from, but I have a whole bag of these little pliable plastic pieces. And what I think I'm going to do is put these over top of the wiring to just glue them in place as an anchor point, and then figure out what to do with the excess wire. These have 2 little plastic pieces jetting out that I want to cut off. Then I'm going to use some Hot Wire Foam Factory Styro Glue and some hot glue to glue these into place. I use basic plastic twist ties to corral these wild wires that are kind of all over the place so that I can move on to covering them up. I do need to be careful when I'm doing this because if I manipulate the wires in such a way that it kind of knocks them out of their connectivity to the power supply, that's going to be an issue. And then I just cut off the excess to keep these nice and tidy. I'm using that same Hot Wire Foam Factory Styro Glue with a little bit of painter's tape over top to hold them under pressure in place, repeating that process on both sides of the diorama. And in about 30 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and remove that painter's tape to avoid damage on the paint. This is high quality painter's tape, so it comes right off, no problem. And that's gonna do it for this project. I hope you enjoyed it.
Vasco Toys. Action figure dioramas and props.